Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back to the show. We are excited to have the Honorable Grant Venerable joining us, our professional of the year, our doctor, our chemist, our artist, ArtMolecular Concepts, don't forget, from the Metro Atlantic area, relocated to California. And he's here to talk more about his memoirs, his articles, his books, his expressionist art, and really just puts life into perspective. And I'm very honored that we've had this time to spend with each other each and every week, and we continue to do so. So, hi, Grant. How are you feeling today?
Hi, Jill. Fine.
Well, thank you for coming back. For those new to the show, just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and we'll dive into today's topics, which I'm interested to hear.
I want to juxtapose on a topic that came up talking to a friend this morning in Flagstaff, Arizona, whom I've known since junior high school days. But we talk about some deep topics. We talk about events from our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and her life has been centered in the music world. Her father's music world. Her father was the famed composer of symphonic music,
Well,
William Grant Still. And but we have had a dialogue for many years between music and the liberal arts and literature fields that she has engaged and the science and math fields that I've engaged. And always one of the subjects of our conversation is the inner voice, the still small voice within that is, you hear
yeah.
more about that in philosophy and in theology, religious studies. I thought that would be a fun topic to get into in a practical sort of way of how that's worked in her life, how it's worked in my life, as many of my academic colleagues do not express an active participation, engaging still small voice within, but yet in order to be successful in their lives, they've had to have some facet of that force, that energy in their everyday lives, no matter what they call it. And they may not even be church goers or synagogue goers or mosque goers.
Mm-hmm.
However, there is this unspoken, this hidden communication in their lives, and that tends to join many of us together in very fruitful dialogues. Well, how that came up for this morning is that she was reminding me of how her late father is still an active presence in her life, and particularly in times of need. And one recent instance in the last few years, she awakened from sleep only to find her father standing next to her bed to address her, to talk about some issues that she was going through
Yeah.
and to give her advice about that. Now, that may seem very strange and interesting, particularly if someone has not had that kind of experience, but many people have. And many that have don't realize that that's what they're going through when they have it. I want to touch on an experiment that I had. I almost said experiment, meaning experience, but the two are the same thing. And experience, everyday experience, are regular experiments that we have with our lives.
Yep.
Mine came about at a kind of a flat period in my life, teaching in a major state university in the Bay Area of California, in which I had had hopes for getting a tenure track position at some point. I had spent most of the 1980s as a systems scientist in Silicon Valley industry, which was like a hiatus in my academic career. One of the most
Yeah.
productive, fruitful, creative periods I've had. Things that went on in industry that were creative were not duplicable in the academic world. Uh, However, this appointment to the tenure track delayed. It
Okay.
seemed delayed. I was told by colleagues this is what the department was working on, and
Yeah.
that um, just be patient. Well, I got impatient after being there about
Happens a lot,
six and a
right?
half years, and so I decided to ask the president. This is a large campus of 30,000 students, and the presidents control who teaches, who does research on their campuses in the final analysis. So I decided to make an appointment with the president, and the president suggested that we have lunch together in the faculty dining room. So that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
This was a very well-known president, very likable man on campus. I had had conversations with him that were very successful conversations. And I thought, well, if there's any person I should ask this question to, it was this particular president. So we met at the probably at his office, and then walked over to the faculty club and had a lunch. So he treated me to lunch there and had a nice conversation that warmed me up to my
Yeah.
question that had to ask. And I said, well, Bob, I'm really concerned I that I get a tenure track position here at this eminent university. And what do you say? Is this a realistic expectation that I have, or do you plan to see that I get on the tenure track?
Yeah.
So that was a good question on my part. And so he got right into the answer. He said, "No, I didn't have
Mm,
any plans to appoint
yeah.
you to the tenure track." And in talking about, I know this has been discussed, but in talking to my dean of the School of Science and Engineering, he felt that was not a fruitful direction for the campus to go, because I was in a
Yeah.
different school. I was in the College of Ethnic Studies in the Department of African American Studies. That was a new department for me to teach in, but a very thrilling experience to teach courses that I designed that actually extended the history of Western civilization from the Nile Valley back starting 15,000 years ago, and then moving up to the more contemporary day that we live in. So there's a lot of important development in Africa long before Europe really got going in the sciences and technology. Well, the whole world really knows something about the rudiments of science and mathematics that were developed in ancient Egypt. Well, the development really occurred even before that. And that was with the people who lived way down south in the Nile Valley Basin, about 4,000 miles south of the Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing these kinds of developments back then. That's really when alchemy was begun and discovered. This was a very early uh, precedent of chemistry, which comes from the same root word, Khem, as it was spelled from the ancient Egyptian language using Roman letters. Well, it was a way to convert something into something else.
Mm-hmm.
In their day, it was very important to have a spiritual connection with the material universe through its energy states.
Yeah.
So for those priests in the temples along the in Egypt, that was more recently, like 5,000
Oh, wow.
years ago,
Okay.
still a long time ago. Um, the priests were the scientific and theological elite of ancient Egypt. So they addressed
Yeah.
material, physical knowledge through spiritual means. And what the priests were doing, they were working on what was called turning lead into gold. That was the great problem of alchemy, to
Mhm.
turn base elements into very elite elements like gold and platinum. That seems a bit silly today, but it wasn't literally changing lead into gold. It was really symbolic language.
Okay.
And people like
Mm.
the wise people of that day, the priests,
Mm-hmm.
and all over the Mediterranean, they would use code language. And that code had to do with alchemy. And the AL prefix did not come into being until the Muslims came into being in around 600 AD or 600 CE, Common Era. So that was a contribution by Arab peoples who were also developing the Islamic religion. But they had this interest
Mm.
in knowledge
Yeah.
and converting lower knowledge to higher level knowledge. And it was symbolized in a discussion called turning lead into
Oh,
gold.
okay.
And that knowledge
Mm-hmm.
was carried into Europe, across North Africa.
Ooh.
Somehow, some way, people, Semitic peoples in the lands of Judea and Israel uh, were partners in knowledge discovery. And a group of them traveled across North Africa. These were the North African Arab peoples, along with the Oriental Jews of the Judean area. And they wound up in Spain. And that takes us about 1200, I'd say, AD, in the Common Era,
Mm-hmm.
in which they found peoples who were the
Wow.
precursors of modern day Spain. However, there were provinces that preceded Spain that were already there. And these people tended to be Roman Catholic. Well,
Mm-hmm.
they were very near Italy. So they were close to the Vatican and the influence of Catholicism in that day in the Mediterranean. Well, these Sephardic Jews and these uh, Muslim North Africans were there and developed. I think the word conquest was used, but it wasn't exactly a conquest as such, like warring and fighting, but simply a different cultural group coming in and affecting the development of what became Spain and Portugal and parts of Italy. What they did was took a culture that these Moors, that's what they were called, the North African Moors, and the Sephardic, not Sephardic quite yet, but we'll use the term Oriental Jews, gave a whole new culture to early Spain so that people actually would not wait every 2 weeks or 3 weeks to bathe. So they,
Mm-hmm.
they developed a lot of perfumes back then to cover up the odors of the body. But what the new group brought in was a whole new sub civilization there. of fine bathhouses and high culture of food and
Mhm.
just living well. And it transformed that part of
Yeah.
Europe into a whole new manifestation. That also influenced next door
Yep.
in Italy. So we had Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand later in the late 1400s. Uh, all this bustle of activity really
Mm-hmm.
generated the energy for the Renaissance and all of the new knowledge that was pouring out of Spain and Italy and Greece and other parts of the Mediterranean. So that's an interesting part of the story. The Renaissance pushed further northward into Europe,
Yep.
and that spawned a religious cultural revolution called the Reformation. So there became competing religious interests and philosophies, and so that uh, the Roman Catholic Church found itself competing with new
Mm.
religious manifestations in Germany, Martin Luther,
Yep.
the Lutheran Church, pushing up even further north into Scandinavia, and then across westernly into what became the United Kingdom. And that was all those things together spawned a Protestant Reformation. But it also spawned an interest on the part of people who were interested in the design and structure of
Yep.
the human body, who were precursors of the medical field. These were the early physicians. They were
Mm-hmm.
also the early philosophers. Uh, Paracelsus came
Yep.
along in that day, and astronomers came along in that day, and that really made a very enriched culture. So I was teaching about these things uh, through the history of ancient Africa coming up into Europe. And it made a very happy situation for me. And I did a lot of writing and publishing. So we come back to the lunch in the faculty dining room in speaking to President Bob and and his explaining, well, the dean of engineering and science didn't think this was really a proper science, that he couldn't really call it science,
Yeah.
which dismayed me a little when I heard it, but I knew I didn't have time to sit
Yeah.
down and give the dean the same course I was giving all of my students. But we had a pleasant lunch, and I said thank you, and thank you especially for your honesty.
Aw.
So that led to the next adventure, conferring with my friend, the psychologist named Lloyd, and because I was applying to other schools
Yep.
in California. And Lloyd said, no, don't apply in
Yep.
California. You're a little too far advanced now for California,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the way your scientific colleagues teach the way teaching was done prior to the 1960s. And this is
True.
already in the 1990s. So he advised me apply to the South, apply to the Midwest, apply to the Mid-East. And that is what I did. Nonetheless, I was a little discouraged and I didn't understand what the master plan was, if I could use that term euphemistically. Um, and it made me lapse into my religious upbringing in Los Angeles when I was a child. And I did what the elders did. I said, well, I'll ask the creator what his advice is on this. And walking down one of the pathways on that beautiful campus, I I was smitten with the urge to look up at the sky and talk to the creator or God, whatever I wanted to call this energy force, which I trusted was in the universe. And I said, okay, creator, you created me. You obviously had some intention that I'm supposed to fulfill based upon abilities. You sent me to UCLA, the University of Chicago. I got all of my advanced degrees that I needed to get to have a good career in teaching chemistry and then later on ethnic studies. And so I just lastly said, well, please tell me what I should be pursuing here. I'm a little bit frustrated and I let it go. I just threw my arms up to the sky and let it go. Well, I, in fact, did apply for some positions because my friend Lloyd said, don't apply for teaching positions. People with your credentials are being looked for, particularly for administrative positions. So that's what I did. For the first time in my existence, I began to apply for deanships, for vice presidencies, for provost positions. Of course, provost is the nice name, elegant name for chief academic officer who's in charge of all of the teaching and research that goes on in a campus. So I said, okay, I'll try that. 2 weeks later, I started getting responses. That had never happened applying for teaching positions. I think I was viewed as over the hill by that time. I was coming into my mid 50s. So um, I was very excited, but then I became again
Mm-hmm.
crestfallen. I got a little worried. Wait a minute. Wait. Academe, just like industry, is full of rumor mills
Yep.
and words. If someone doesn't like you and they start rumors, it could affect whether or not you get another position or the position that you want.
Yep.
And it was a strong enough fear
Too. Yeah.
that made me uh, talk to this spiritual force again. What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
Really, after I asked that question of this indwelling inner voice, I heard an inner voice. Now, my father had been gone for 10 years from his earthly existence, but it
Aw.
was his voice that I heard. I said, I told him, I'm worried that some of the people I reported to and like 10 years earlier would try to interfere with my getting a new job. And he said, don't worry, go contact them, call them on the phone, at least one or two particular people. And that's what I did. Because I said to my father's inner voice, I said, are you kidding? And he said, no, I'm not kidding. Pick up the phone and call them. And that's what I did. Um, the good news is that that person said, yes, I will certainly do that. I will support your application. I know the president of one of the universities that you've applied to. I will call her on the phone and say, I'm recommending you. I'll write you a letter, and that will be that. Well, as luck would have it, and it was really more than luck, I did get an interview from that and another university. And I said, wow, this is wonderful. So I did go to Chicago and I stayed there for 2 or 3 days. I stayed with my cousins who lived in Chicago, Hyde Park, and had a very good interview session there at the Chicago State University. And that wasn't the whole story, but my host faculty member that means the person designated to pick you up at the airport, drive you to where you're staying while you're there in town, and then take you back to the airport, who would also function as my host during my time spent on the campus, so that at least one person on the search committee will have talked to me in greater depth than the committee, the entire committee could talk to you in depth. So that's what happened. And in the middle of my meeting with the committee, when I first arrived at the campus on I guess it was a Thursday uh, morning, uh, toward the middle of that session with that committee, my host person who had left a few minutes earlier, no, she stopped by the president's office to talk to her. So the president's secretary, who was in the next room to where the interview was taking place, came in and said, please bring Dr. Venerable in to talk to the president before the committee takes him to his next appointment with another committee or person. And so that's what happened. This comes into my role as a storyteller. I love to tell stories of how my learning is connected with my actual life experiences and made them richer experiences. So what happened? I did meet the president right after leaving the committee, and she was out in her outer office at the Xerox copier making some copies, and that's where we met, was at the copier. Now, that seems almost provident, but she says, well, please come into my office. So we went into her office, which was a beautiful office, and she sat down with me at her little conference table, a small table, and she said, well, Professor Joyce, that was my host's name. She said, "You got to hire this man. He needs to be here." And I said, "Well, that's nice to hear." And she says, "As a matter of fact, I am interested in bringing you aboard. However, there are procedures I have to go through to get that clear." And this relates to academic politics. And because uh, there was already someone else as an interim provost, which is what I was applying for at that campus. She wisely, because the woman has served well, the president wisely said, well, I need to hire her permanently for that job. However, we had another job vacated through the absence of the gentleman who was in that position a year earlier. So there was legitimately an opening there that had not been rehired. So she says, if you are interested, she says, here's what I'm willing to pay you. And now you just have to tell me what else you need. And so we worked that out. She gave me her telephone number on her private line so that if I had any questions, I could call and get an immediate answer. And in fact, I did that and said, well, here's some things I need uh, from the campus. And she says, well, I think I can arrange that. So I want you to let me know if you feel that you can come out here and join us. And so that's the long story short. Uh, it's important for where we were last time when we talked. We talked about the history of the Jerusalem temple,
Oh, yeah.
which is one of the most important history stories. That's a That's a redundancy, because that's what history is a story. Um, because that same inner voice that guided me in finally getting an interview spoke to me just a month ago about the history of the Jerusalem temple. And Jill, if you recall, I said the first temple that the Jewish people had was erected by King Solomon, who was one of the great revered kings of Israel, of Judea. And Solomon built this wonderful temple. Wasn't as big as later temples, but it was pretty good size for that day. It was like a 2 or 3 story building, and it helped to uh, consolidate the culture of ancient Israel. And the key word when you consolidate a nation is education. That may seem trite, but it isn't. And we talked about that before. The most important activity of any civilized group of people is to educate the young as well as the adult population to understand and transmit the culture, the purpose of the people into later generations. Now that's where the terminology, the chosen people, comes from. I suspect the chosen, that terminology was imposed by Gentile people who might have been a little bit envious, maybe more than envious, of how progressive and intelligent this early Jewish group was, which they'd only been Jews for only several hundred years, back to Abraham. And before that, they were really Hebraic herding people. They herded sheep, they herded goats, they they wandered across the desert plain and went from place to place until they settled down. And so the temple culture was part of the Jewish civilization as well as Western civilization in general. Now, where does that put us?
Well,
It put us to the Babylonian conquest around 500 BC, when the Babylonian armies came in from Babylon to Jerusalem and conquered Jerusalem and pretty much destroyed Jerusalem. And they kidnapped the elite Jewish educated population. The Babylonians did. So what did that leave? Okay, it left that iteration of the Jewish people being there for 200 or 300 years until the next temple was built and the Jews could go back home to their homeland in Judea and built a new temple, temple number 2. And that temple lasted a few hundred years, maybe 400 or 500, until ancient Roman Empire tore down the second Jerusalem temple. And that was a pretty difficult experience for the people to endure. So the rabbinical councils met, the leaders of the Jewish population met, because now they're dealing with Rome as their overlords. However, history was not done with Israel yet. or the Jewish people. And that takes me to this next level of my story, which came through an inner voice just in the last month. And I said, wait a minute. Now, this is how my mind thinks. It actually can leap from one fact to another fact, and to another, and another, until a pattern starts to emerge in my mind. And I realize I've got something I've got to look at. This is important. And what the pattern was that, number one, the third temple was not built right after the destruction of the second temple. In fact, the rabbinical councils did not feel it appropriate to build the third temple until they got a message from Jehovah, the Almighty God, that let's see, the
Take a sip.
I'm getting impressed with my own insight here.
That you needed
So
a drink. It's
I
okay.
lost my place. Tell people my call-in number while
Yep.
I'm gathering my
Six
thoughts
three
here.
one 307 4010. The lines are open. 631-307-4010. If you have any questions for our friend Grant here, anything related to what we're talking about today, or any question in particular, you're always welcome to call in. Feel free. We'd love to hear from you. 631-307-4010. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, that really goes back to the meaning of my graduate education. Now that I'm talking about temple number 3, my graduate education was a powerful moment in my life. I had a powerful undergraduate education
Mm-hmm.
at UCLA, the University of California,
Yep.
Los Angeles. And there were 4 or so of my professors
Yeah.
that felt strongly I needed to go to Chicago to study experimental physical chemistry. Well, that's what I thought I went to Chicago to
Yeah.
do, was to study physical, inorganic, and physical chemistry, chemical physics. However, I didn't really figure out why I went there for decades after getting my PhD. So my memoir,
Mm-hmm.
called Footprints in the Chaotic Unknown
Ah.
by Grant Venerable, was what came out of the whole experience. The memoir synthesized all of these patterns that I was synthesizing over the years and coming up with a final pattern or a semi-final pattern. And so I just use the word about how my mind gets from here to here, this experience to that. I put them all together and I notice patterns. That was a process I refined as a PhD student researching at the campus and the Argonne National Laboratory. The whole purpose of that
Yep.
turned out to be the purpose of the rabbinical councils, who were the real leaders of the Jerusalem temple over the ages, over the history of Judaism. They had to teach themselves, presumably with uh, the help of their Lord, to put together patterns that they would observe over the decades. Because the earliest councils received the information from the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Mm.
which had been written on papyrus back before 1000 BC,
Yeah.
before AD 1. And that these were the people that translated those scrolls into the Torah, which became the Old Testament
Yep.
of the King James Bible. Well, since the King James Bible, which also got the New Testament, also written by Jewish uh, uh, wisdom people of that day, uh, that's what started when things started to fragment with early Christianity. So today we got about 200, 300 Bibles.
Yep.
So which one are you going to believe? Or which one are you going to
Exactly.
follow?
I know.
And that came out of really the intellectual processes, their strengths and weaknesses, so that people thought they had to have all these separate Bibles to get the right answers. So we're still trying to understand that. But as education started in the
Yeah.
temple culture, began to connect all of the fields together. In my case, those are the fields of science, mathematics, psychology,
Mm-hmm.
and theology, religious studies that combine all of my
Mm-hmm.
experience since I was a child. Now, where does that put us? Or where does it put me? It meant
It meant, go ahead.
knowledgeable,
Ah, there we go.
skilled
Okay.
psychologist and applying it to my own life, the lives of my friends, my relatives. Also, I had been through about 6 or 7 different religious
Ah.
denominations. This started with the Methodists and then went through a number. It went into New Age
Mm-hmm.
denominations because of my father in the 1950s in order to survive the loss of our mother, his wife, and how to live life more successfully. How could he raise 3 children without a mate? But he did get a new wife within a few years. That marriage ended in divorce, but there was a lot of value gained from
Mm-hmm.
that second mother and second wife, which helped me get through graduate school
Aw.
because this woman was such a scholar herself,
Wow.
such a poet. And she taught me the parts of speech. She taught me grammar more than I was getting out of school. So it was no problem to write a doctoral dissertation.
Aw.
I at least had that really down, that process down.
Yeah.
What also was coming out of that graduate school experience, as I just said, was learning how to synthesize knowledge and see patterns, whether they related to that particular field or my
Mm-hmm.
own life or another field. Well,
Yeah.
that is education writ large
Oh, yeah.
and universally, which is slipping away from us, except in the
Mm-hmm.
best schools today. So that really turned out to be my lifetime assignment
Aw.
was how to interrogate subject matter that could not talk back to you and tell you what it was,
Interesting.
what it
Right?
was doing.
And
Well, as I mentioned to you before on the program, I was looking at cobalt cyanide molecules and
wow.
bombarding them with high energy radiation to break those complexes apart to see what I had. Once the reaction was over,
Yep.
in just a few millionths of a second. That took some really specialized
mm-hmm.
equipment to track down.
Yep.
Plus, it needed a professor. My professor, Jack Halpern, was a very
Yep.
wise man in how to teach.
Yep.
interrogating a subject like chemical compounds that could not talk back, but how
Yep.
to do experiments on them that would give you the information you needed. And I had to measure their rates of reaction.
Wow.
That was really the discipline I got from graduate school. Although the chemistry was vitally interesting, I got out of school and over the years began to apply
Mm.
it to people and
Yeah.
social issues, which is why I relate what I'm talking about so much to problems we're having today with a chaotic
Yeah.
society. The economics is chaotic. Everything is chaotic. Chaotic. People's lives are upside down. What do you do with it? How do you apply the Torah to that? How do you apply physical chemistry to that? How do you apply psychology to that? How do you apply theology to all of that? And that is a specialty discipline in its own right, which few people possess. That's the purpose of writing my memoir, because it's really a book of all of those things put together and how you get through problems, no matter what field they're in
Yeah.
or what your profession is. And that's why I'm suggesting, advising, go take a look at it. It's online. Look at Apple, look at Amazon, look at Barnes and Noble's Footprints in the
Mm-hmm.
Chaotic Unknown by Grant Venerable. You could even uh, search me on my website, Grant D Venerable PhD.com, all lowercase. Now I've said it all.
Yeah.
I said where you can go find a lot of what I have talked about today, and the very story that I
Yeah.
told about finding a new position in the administrative world is in there. I think it's in volume, might be in
Aw.
volume four. No, I don't know what volume it's in, but there's 4 volumes of ebooks. And so, so what do you have to say with that, Jill?
Oh my goodness. I can't. We still have more time, by the way. You wrapped up a little early. We still have 7 more minutes to talk. Hopefully someone calls in 631-307-4010. Always new addition to your life, your stories, your journey. And wow. Is there anything in your life that if you could go back to change, would you change it?
That's a good question. Glad you asked, because there's times I wished I could have changed something.
Mm-hmm.
I wished I could have been more, oh, tractable. I could use that word. More uh, malleable when I was at Cal Poly, because a lot of colleagues simply did not know where I was coming from with my teaching techniques, how I addressed chemistry, because for them it was just a puzzle. What is he doing? But it worked. But anyway, I wound up at another university as a result, and they were even more perplexed. And I thought they would be a little more liberal than they were. But that shows you how unreliable terminology can be. And politics just makes a whole hash out of labels and what I call uh, uh, clothing labels. And when you hear someone calling someone else a liberal, someone is calling someone else a conservative or left leaning or right leaning, it doesn't mean a thing. There's
Mm-hmm.
no meaning to those words except if you want to insult someone and compete with them to get elected to some office. And so you have to convince somebody, oh, you're conservatives, you're liberals. It's all just foolish foolery. But that's the purpose of education, is to get down underneath into the mental processes and their psychological implications to ask the right questions and to inspire people with those designations that make them understand and feel their worth in the world, a people in which we all need to work together.
Mm. Well, Grant.
So
Um,
that's so yes, I did have some regrets, but in the final analysis, I said, no, I'm not looking back. That doesn't work either.
and that
Uh,
is so important. But also, I know, some people out there say, well, hey, I didn't have a good background. I didn't have education. I didn't have parents. I didn't have people to push me. What would you say to people out there listening today who feel like they can't do it?
I've had that come up that I just can't do it. It doesn't mean I was successful in reaching everyone in my classrooms, but those that hung in there and did all of the work, came to my office hours, they succeeded. Others didn't quite have the oomph or the strength to do it then, but came around later and did it. Um, Now you hear a lot of talk in the political conversation about offering students different intellectual methodologies and like that. But that is what you do. But it doesn't mean, as some spokesmen out in the political arena are suggesting, that certain universities don't hire conservatives or certain universities don't hire liberals. What it
Hmm.
generally means, they may be right in maybe one case out of 100,000, but there are, we do know that people who think what liberalness means doesn't lend itself to a happy career to some people, or conservativeness. It doesn't lend itself
Hmm.
to a happy career in the way certain fields are set up. So I'm both. I have very liberal tendencies when it comes to opening myself to new ways at looking at old knowledge, old issues, old problems. And yet, I'm a conservative when it comes to preserving what works. What I've noticed over the years works best for me. And I've had relatives, older relatives, who said, well, you got that automobile way back there in the 60s or the 70s, and said, you can't get any other
Mm-mm.
kind of automobile because that automobile
Yeah.
served you so well. But that's a way of thinking. And it's
Oh
important to be
gosh.
exposed to that. You don't
Yeah.
always have to apply it to automobiles.
No.
You could apply it with people you associate with or activities you associate yourself with. Does it work? Does it get you where you want, what you want? And I think that's what religion attempts to do.
Mm.
Because you might smile a little about this next remark, but it was the news media was at times not very respectful of Ronald and Nancy Reagan. Some of them were just not oriented to Reagan's style of politics. But the Reagans openly talked about people they called psychic people to understand how better to lead the country. And had I not known people who knew the Reagans, that would have been very strange to me. But
Yeah.
I also met the main woman who was one of their psychics. Met her in a close friend's home one day on Thanksgiving decades ago, who this woman very much thought like me in terms of how I synthesized knowledge. I wasn't as good as she was at the time, but she was much older than I.
Mm-hmm.
And she gave me one answer to your question that you asked, what can people do to reach their learning goals?
Yep.
And that this woman said, go hang out with people who are already expert in those areas.
Perfect.
Stay with the people who know those areas that you think you'd be happy in. And I took that seriously. So I attached myself to people that I met that I felt, oh, that's an ability I want to develop more of. And
Uh,
that's what I did.
mm. Well, thank you. The Honorable Grant D. Venerable. Pleasure having you here, and glad we got to chat a little more and fill that gap because there's always so much to talk about. So thank you for today and
Right.
being so kind, and we shall reach out again next week, right?
Right?
Perfect. We
Right.
will. I can't wait. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Grant. Have a great day, hon. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.